to this edition of Simsbury School News. My name is Dominique Avery. Today, our focus is on the Simsbury School System budget for the next fiscal year, a $67.9 million budget, which the Board of Education approved at their February 23rd meeting. The budget included a 2.2% increase over last year. Today, to discuss that budget and how that budget was reached and what it means for both students and parents and, of course, residents of the town, are my guests, Matt Curtis.
Nice to see you.
Who is the superintendent of schools, and Burke LeClaire, who is the school's business manager. So, Matt, the school budget is the largest driver of taxes in town.
Right.
And yet, with a decreasing number of reporters around and media outlets, it's really very hard for the public to get a good sense of what it's all about, what's in it, in the English language, not in, numbers. And that's exactly why we're talking about this today. So I thought I'd start out with the two of you by asking what's the most important thing that you want the public to know, just from the top, and then we'll get into some of the details later.
I would think overall, when you speak thematically, the thing I would want the public to know is we have a really well-defined process and spend considerable amount of time making decisions about our budget requests and what we want to move forward. And I think we try to balance two things, and we've talked about this in the past. We try to balance the fact that we have very high quality programs and services that we offer in our school system, and we want to maintain and improve those, and we want to be cognizant of our fiscal responsibility and the tax burden for people in this community. We know that we have a very high mill rate in this town, and that has created a lot of conversation, particularly over the course of the last several years, where we've worked I think very closely with the Board of Finance in setting goals and targets to try to minimize that impact to taxpayers, but recognize that one of the reasons, maybe the main reason people move to town with children is because of the quality of the school system. So there is a detailed process and a lot of time and effort that goes in, and you know this as a former Board of Education member, to make decisions with regards to both of those. We try to do the best we can to communicate. I communicate the process along the way to our constituents, to our parents, and to our staff so that they're with us every step of the way. And we try to post our materials on the website. But I do think, unfortunately, the busyness of everybody these days, we don't have great attendance to our workshops. We don't have great attendance at our board meetings. So we try to push out some of that information to be as effective in communicating as we can.
I did notice that there is a little paragraph on the website that says, if you have any questions about the budget or the budget process or anything you want to tell me, contact me directly, you. Has anybody ever do that?
Absolutely. I mean, not a great number of people, but from time to time, particularly if there's a certain program or maybe a reduction in an area, I think something that hits home with somebody, they want to get a little more detail on that. And we've had a handful of those calls this year and over the past several years.
Was there a specific program that they were concerned about?
I had a couple calls this year on two things. Reductions of some of our classroom sections, which we've talked about as kind of one of the main drivers. You mentioned it, Dominique, is our declining enrollment. So one of the first things we do when we roll over our enrollment is look at our class size guidelines and say, in an effort to kind of minimize cost, are there places that we can take teaching positions away but maintain the same service and class size? And we were able to do that in 6 areas this year, so 6 full-time positions, which helps us to keep the overall cost down. People kind of want to know how that hits at their school or at that grade level. So talking through that a little bit. And we've added some additional special education staffing this year for 2 specialized programs at the high school as students transition up, and had a few questions about that, but just a handful.
So it's interesting. I saw in your meeting with the Board of Finance that you said something about there's 29 special ed students at the high school. Burke, is that an unusual number?
I think the thematic message that we've heard is that we've run specialized programming in special education for the K-6 schools, and over the last few years we've seen a need for some of those specialized programmings at the middle school, and now it's coming to the high school. So it's really a demographic trend. It's not a surprise. individual needs and this specialized programs are something that we have to try to provide to these children. So there's some staffing needs that are at the high school this year. Last year it was at the middle school, so they're just kind of moving their way up.
So Burke, while I have your attention, so the budget process begins quite early. So you're, as the business manager, I mean, you're a number cruncher. You sit in your office, and how do you go about this actually?
Well, definitely, it's a superintendent-driven process with his cabinet team, and while I have the lead end and the business realm, we started off looking at major drivers back in September, kind of giving the Board of Ed a preview, and then there's a series of forms that start from my office that go to all of the principals and the department supervisors. They submit their requests, and then Matt and the cabinet team review with each of those schools what are their major needs, giving the context of the overall town, and we also keep up to date on state aid and all of those other factors. So then we start meeting again with the Board of Ed, and we've been doing that, picking up again on major drivers and workshops, culminating in March, when we then
So
start to
basically,
present to other boards.
what both of you have said to me is, well, I'm going to go to the city of Hartford, go to their decision to build a stadium. They did that in a couple of months. We're going to build a stadium here. It's going to bid. Doesn't sound to me like that could ever happen in Simsbury. It's certainly not with you. It sounds to me like you're extremely organized. You ask for the asks from the schools, right?
Yep.
And then and it's not slapdash. It is very organized.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we continue to fall back on is we have a strategic plan. We have a district vision and a set of core beliefs, and do the requests and the needs align with that, and how do we prioritize things in an age when we know we can't always have everything that maybe we desire, but we try to make real good decisions relative to that and balance that also with the feedback we get from the Board of Finance. And I think, the reality is, over the past several years, I think we've been able to do that well. I think the last 2 years there hasn't been a mill rate increase. I think that's been important to people. That's been one of the reasons, excuse me, I think the budgets have moved through relatively smoothly. I think the Board of Finance, in their planning early and looking at revenue in certain areas of growth in the town, gave us some feedback about 2%. And could we, excuse me, find a way to be within that range? We're certainly close. Tonight we present to our board some different ideas for some.
We are recording this on March 22nd,
Right.
so this is going to air for a month afterwards. So
Yeah.
just so
But
that
in
people
terms of
understand.
process, it's ongoing.
Right.
Even though the board approved a budget, as we refine some of our insurance numbers in other areas, I think we'll be able to propose to our board some cost savings that may get
So
us
may get you closer to 2%.
get us closer to 2%. And I've always said, the goals of the Board of Finance and trying to get there. If we can get there and maintain our program and feel good about where we are, that's a relatively easy conversation. It comes to a point if there is a year where we have some identified needs and we just can't get to that point, that we have to have a different conversation and seek more feedback. But I think the process has been pretty productive. We had, I think, a really good dialogue with the Board of Finance recently about different things to look at. They've offered to pay down a little bit of some one-time costs for us that aren't overly significant, but help to move the bottom line a little bit. And I feel like all parties are after the same thing. And I think that's why we have
did notice
success.
in one of their meetings with you that one of the things that they raised, one of the issues that they raised was, given the state's terrible budget problems this year, that there is a possibility that we will get less money and that you should be prepared for it, right? So is that something that you're now thinking about?
I think, it's hard to, you certainly can't ignore it, right? You pick up the paper every day and you see a different scenario and you see the major reductions that have going on. I think some of the concern that was brought up at that meeting about loss of certain revenues has been quelled a bit in terms of what those particular areas were. We've always planned on what the governor's budget has been, so it is a challenge for any large organization to have various different budget scenarios planned.
Your budget comes out first before theirs
Correct.
does, right?
Correct. So I think it's important to see what what ongoing feedback we get from the state, and if we do need to react to something, I mean, we'll pull all parties together and certainly have those conversations. And I know that the Board of Finance in the town would be a part of that as well.
So the other thing that I noticed that they raised with you was the issue of the Hartford and the reduction in taxes that's coming there as sort of as a warning, or
Yeah.
So I guess everybody's thinking about, usually during the budget season, given my age and the fact that I don't have school-age children, I usually hear criticism about the school budget from town residents who are worried about taxes going up. And as you mentioned, we've had no tax increases for 2 years. But this year, for the first time in a long time, I noticed several threads on social media about people complaining that we haven't done enough. We haven't spent enough on the schools. Have you heard any of that? Do you follow social media? Or Facebook? Have you heard any of that? I've heard people complaining
I'm not a
about
Facebooker per se,
Right.
but I'm aware of different threads and different things that go on. I haven't had any specific conversations about that with anybody. I welcome them if people want to have those discussions. I think we've had some real constructive dialogue with our Board of Ed this year about some of the resources we're asking for, and answering the question of, in particular, was a math coach position. Well, if it's good to have one, should we have more than one? And I felt comfortable at this point in our plan to integrate and move things through. So, I mean, I do feel good about the resources we put in place. Sometimes it's how effective are we in articulating over the past couple years where those dollars have gone, and how equipped is our staff, too, to talk about those things. And we continue, Burke and I and my cabinet level administrators, think about how can we do a more effective job of messaging so that people in the end do know where the dollars go.
So if I recall correctly, part of the one issue that was raised on social media was the issue of textbooks. And somebody was complaining about, I don't know, not enough
Age of a
new
textbook or something.
So, and I did notice that you have a budget item that increases spending for textbooks, or am I
I
wrong?
do know we have some old textbooks in play for sure. Erin Murray, our Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, has kind of in her curriculum wheelhouse in how we review, monitor, and then request new textbooks. So it is an area this year. I can't remember the exact dollar figure. Is it up about $30,000
Yeah, that's
from last year?
So there is a significant
There's a significant
spending
increase there. And it's an area of significant investment on an annual basis. It's about $265,000 in terms of a driver for us. So it's not minimal dollars by any stretch.
I think another thing that they asked about was the impact of open choice, and whether is that impacting our budget negatively. And I remember a few months ago you told me that last year and this year you haven't taken more students.
Yeah.
Were they indicating that they want you to take fewer? Did you? I didn't quite
From the
understand.
general public?
Yeah.
I haven't had those conversations over
Or
the
the
past
Board of
couple of years
Finance.
from the Board of Finance. No, I know when I came in to the superintendency 4 years ago, there was quite a bit of conversation about the open choice attendance grant, because those funds were utilized to fund the movement to full day kindergarten at the time.
Right.
So we actually had some real good dialogue about how we, from a transparency standpoint, how we demonstrate where our grant funding spending has gone. I think our overall open choice population has gone up a little bit, not significantly in the past few years. What we look at on an annual basis more than anything else right now are siblings, if there's a sibling in the program that we can integrate in. But I haven't received, quite honestly, too many questions recently about open choice and the attendance grant. I know we've received a little, I'll call it push in the past. I remember at some of the town meetings about the allocation of dollars that we receive per student for open choice, that if we have a per pupil audited expenditure of, say, $15,000 and you receive $6,000 per student, no judgment on the program, but is that a good financial deal? And there are certainly some challenges relative to that, but it's a program we've supported for a very long time. It's the 50th anniversary this year of the
Really?
program. We have, I think, about 145 to 150
I was just
students
gonna
in,
ask.
and can certainly point to a lot of successes in that program, but certainly a program of that size doesn't come without its challenges too.
So how much is there a number figure on how that works, on what that costs us? And are we still getting, what you just told me
Right.
in English, we're still getting back less than it costs us to educate?
And it's always been that way, and
Right.
actually the state in the last 10 years or so has put different parameters in place to increase that funding. So it's certainly moving in the right direction, and it's hard to draw a one-to-one correlation on a per pupil cost. We try to be very cognizant of the fact that when we take new students into the program with a declining enrollment, it's not the cost of adding a new teacher at a grade level. So, I mean, we've I think, done an effective job of that. The dollars have certainly helped us to offset some other programmatic costs as well.
So you've been very quiet,
Well,
Mr. Numbers Man over there.
yeah, I mean, that conversation, I was asked at a recent Board of Finance meeting, I think it was last week, I was asked a similar question that might have been the one that you were
Yeah.
referring to. So it is a difficult conversation for people to get their heads around in terms of when you take the total spending and the state asks us what is our net current expenditure per pupil, that doesn't mean that each time a child enters the district or leaves the district that's going to translate directly into that cost. So it really goes back to the way that we look to accept students spread out through 7 schools, spread out through 12 grades, and in fact preschool, and we don't believe it has a detrimental financial impact. But we're careful that we're not accepting students where it might put us up against a class size guideline. As Matt said earlier, we try to be transparent about what are the it's just under $1 million worth of funding, $6,000 per student for the bulk of them, and then we get some extra funding for preschool and for kindergarten. We try to have those students come as early as they can to get the full experience, and I think it's
Well, we have a moral
continues to be-
responsibility to do that.
continues
right?
to be a real beneficial program.
It's a moral responsibility for Hartford students and a benefit to our students.
Absolutely.
It just occurred to me, there might be some people who are watching who don't know what Open Choice is, and now we've spent some time. Can you just explain
Sure.
that shortly?
Yeah, it's a program that I think the initial 50 years ago, I think it was called Project Choice.
Or Project Concern.
Project
Yeah,
Concern,
yeah.
okay. So it's a program that's state program. It's managed by CREC through a lottery system where students have an opportunity, inner city students, to attend a school experience in a suburban district. And when those students come here, we take them as if they are our students, and we try to make connections with the families and provide them every opportunity to a quality school system that our own Simsbury residents would receive.
So we're, just to make sure that people understand, we're recording this on March 22nd before the Board of Finance votes on your budget and before the public hearing on the budget, which is April 6th. But I think we should remind residents that they are going to have a say in a referendum. So do you know when that is? And
We understand it's May 10th. We
Yeah.
don't know that the Board of Selectmen has officially designated that, but that's our
I
understanding
think I've seen that
of their
date, yeah.
target date.
And just to remind people that the vote on the referendum is all at Henry James. It's only at one voting place, not at the individual places like, right.
And I would say, I mean, if people have an opportunity to go out to the website, we've tried to, the PowerPoint, the budget presentation, tried to really boil it down to 3 areas and be concise. So the first area would be like the budget context, which would talk about things like declining enrollment and things that would impact the budget from kind of a driver standpoint, upward or downward. We do a section on return on investment, which is always important to know. What do people say about our school system? We're in the age of rankings. How do we rate and what does it look like? So there's some real quality data there. And then the major drivers, 5 or 6 different areas that really have impacted spending this year. And I think that would give people kind of a global handle.
So why don't
on
you
what
actually
things
go,
look like.
I mean, we've been sort of touching on some of them.
Sure.
Why don't you go over the major drivers now? Well, so, I mean, people can go
Yeah.
back and look, but they can
Yeah,
also hear it.
I would say no surprise to anybody. The biggest driver is on the personnel side. So over almost 80% of our cost is either in contractual obligations or benefits. So when you look at that situation and contractual increases and kind of the up and down of where we are with staffing, of our probably 2.2% increase that's presented in this budget, I think the personnel aspects of it are about 1.7. The other major driver would be, well, of that is the insurance and pension, so which is about $400,000. So let me just go to the page, so I'm not going all from memory, Dominique, right? And I can give you some summary of how that all plays out. All right. So really, the way I like to try to explain it to people in quick order is, if you take the impact of all our contracts, it's in excess of $1 million. So our teaching contract, and just rolling forward what that looks like, and the size of our organization. So it's kind of an exercise we do in the budget planning. If you take our organization and you just move it forward, what does that overall increase look like? And it's about 3.6% when you put in some of the insurance impact, which is about $400,000. You put in textbooks, and then we have requested, on top of contracts this year, 5 new positions. So 3 of those are in special education, 2 are the teaching positions we talked about before. A third is a social worker position at the elementary level to spread across our 5 elementary schools. We're seeing children with more needs, families with more needs, and how can we serve them? But really, contractually, staffing and insurance, you move that forward, you have about a 3.66% increase. Right? And then we always try to look at these other drivers we talked about. So what does our enrollment look like? Well, we are able to reduce 6 sections, or when I call sections, teaching positions, classroom teaching positions, due to enrollment. We also have some retirements. When people retire and you rehire, you're able to absorb some cost savings there as well.
Highest paid teachers who are
Right,
retiring.
probably higher
newer,
mid-range, right? So about 150,000 in savings there. No surprise or mystery that we go to the gas pump and things are much cheaper these days than they were. So
Although they're going up again.
a little bit, but fuel savings in terms of fixed pricing, we've really been able to realize some savings, about $150,000. And with our equipment results, we saw a pretty large uptick last year in our equipment budget, and able to kind of lower that this year. So when you look at those kind of efficiencies or cost savings, you're taking almost close to $1 million out, $965,000. It's about a 1.45 off of your 3.6, and that's where we land at the 2.2% increase. That's a lot of data in a crunch,
Right.
but globally, I think you look at it that way, and then you can kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what it looks like. And as I said, we have some ideas tonight that we'll present to our board to bring that number to about a little bit below 2, to about a 1.94.
So I know someone who, every single time we have a discussion about the budget, he always asks, why do we have so many coaches and so many sports at the high school?
Well, I think that I'll go back to really strategic planning and what we value as a district. And I think we value comprehensive programming, academic, clubs, extracurriculars. I don't know specifically when we're asking how many coaches. I don't know if that's assistant coaches, whatever it might be, but I know that we make our decisions in alignment and benchmark against other districts. So, I mean, one thing I can say is we certainly have very comprehensive offerings.
Right.
And I've always said, the last couple years into our board, I think our biggest challenge is going to be over the next 5 years as Simsbury High School, as that smaller enrollment bubble hits there. I mean, it's hit there a little bit, but when it really starts to hit, how do we have conversations about those comprehensive
You
offerings?
you might have to reduce some of them.
You know,
Yeah.
and that will be a tough conversation for our
Right,
community and for our
right.
board.
Interesting. So the other thing that people are going to be voting on and that you presented was a capital budget.
Yeah.
So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what's in it. And then I noticed that one of the concerns to residents is the issue of track replacement and this whole issue of crumb rubber and what goes on the track.
Yeah.
And
You want to talk a little bit about
and
capital?
Burke, I thought maybe you
Sure.
could talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
Sure. So we have several maintenance-focused items. There's four projects, starting with the track. We were one of the earlier towns, districts to have a synthetic turf field, and a few years ago, it was 2005. So we've received a full 10 years, which is what was estimated out of that, and we've seen a lot of use of this turf field because it's able to be played on by multiple sports without worrying about the weather impacts on natural grass. We 2 years ago replaced the synthetic track surface, and we tried to extend some of the life of the turf that's there. So that is a crumb rubber turf infill, as you made reference to, and that is by far the most common type of field across the country. When we went to look to do this replacement process, we working with the architectural firm BSC Group that has done many of these fields, and the athletic director working with coaches looked at other turf fields that had been done more recently and made sure that we were going to be happy with how the fields play. One of the aspects that we wanted to try to improve upon is that in the hottest temperatures, the weather, because of the crumb rubber, can be very warm in those this fall end of summer days. So there's actually a product that's in our base bid, which is called a coated crumb rubber. It takes an coating that encapsulates these rubber pieces, and it's going to be a green color. So that actually it's been proven to keep the heat down up to 25
Does that do
degrees.
anything to allay the health concerns about?
It has been considered along with a list of other alternate infill products. It is one that, in fact, two fields, one in New Milford, one in Manchester, utilized this type of alternate infill. One of the issues is that for all of the alternate products, we are still working off the Connecticut Department of Public Health studies that have been happening for the last roughly 7 to 8 years. There's yet to be a link to human health for this existing crumb rubber, and we know that there's going to be a new federal study coming up in the end of this year. I think they're going to start working on that.
But you can't wait.
But we are in
Right.
the situation of being able to wait and see. So looking at the other alternate types of products, the unfortunate thing is there's also not nearly the amount of study to say
Right.
that those are more healthy. So we're really, we've read many studies, and many other districts have been through this, and many of our neighbors, private schools, public schools, and they're still using the crumb rubber. So I think this coated crumb rubber adds some added health benefit in terms of keeping the heat down, and really seems to be the most prudent way to proceed.
Well, with that note, I have to say we've run out of time. I'd like to thank everyone here at SCTV behind the scenes for their help in getting the show on the air, and thanks especially to my guests, Matt
Thank
Curtis
you.
and Burke LeClaire. Thank you so much. This went by so fast. Finally, thank you for joining us, and don't forget to vote in the referendum on May 10th. If you missed any part of this show, you can find it on demand at simsburytv.org. A reminder, all Board of Education meetings air on SCTV on Comcast Channel 95 on the 2nd to 4th Tuesdays of the month. Finally, we would love it if you would also like us on Facebook. I'm Dominique Avery. See you next time for Simsbury School News.